Hey, Polly.
Hey Greg, how are you?
I'm all right. So today
Mhm.
we have Stephen Murray of SafeSpot on. Um, I remember doing some research looking for guests, and when I came across this organization, I was like, "Wow, we got to have them on because it's something unique." Unfortunately, they're not stationed, I'll say, in Rhode Island, but
Okay.
they can help out in Rhode Island. But yeah, we have Stephen Murray. He's the associate director of overdose prevention at Boston Medical. He's the director of SafeSpot. He's an adjunct clinical assistant professor over at Boston University for the School of Public Health. He's
I see your notes over there. That's
Yeah, I
quite
need
a
it because that's quite a title. I think every letter of the alphabet is in this title. But he's got a lot of great information. I think he's going to bring a lot of energy on this podcast, and yeah, we're looking forward to talking to him.
All right. I can't wait to hear what he has to say.
All right. So without further ado, joining us today on Totally Preventable, we have Stephen Murray, the Associate Director of Overdose Prevention at Boston Medical, Director of SafeSpot, and the Adjunct Clinical Assistant Professor of Community Health Sciences at Boston University School of Public Health. Stephen, how are you doing today?
I'm doing so well. Thanks for nailing the title.
Yeah,
That's
did he
good.
get it
How
all
are you
right?
guys? He got it all out. It was good.
Holy cow.
Yeah, you're hired if you want to be my future introducer.
Got it. Got it. Wow.
Greg's a good PR guy.
Yeah.
He's
Yeah.
like,
Yeah,
he's
yeah,
got a good voice for it, and he really likes to hype people up.
good. I love it.
I don't know how to take that. She didn't say anything about the face. She's like,
Well,
good voice for it.
when you asked me if I wanted to video record, I was going to say, I do have a face for radio, so well, we could just yeah,
well, Stephen, to start things off as we normally do, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got to where you are today?
sure, yeah. So I live in Massachusetts. I'm originally from New York. I have kind of a winding self history of sort of ups and downs. I lived overseas for most of my life. My dad worked for Coca-Cola, so we got moved over when I was a kid. Um, Pretty early exposure to alcohol in Europe. It's pretty socially acceptable. And that sort of started me off on sort of like early substance use, and ended up coming back to the US for college, and I went to the University of Miami. And that's where I got my had started my chaotic relationship with opiates, meth, and benzos, and that lasted about 4 years. And I went to rehab in 2011 and went through this sort of, kind of typical recovery journey, ups and downs, returns to use, um, you know, good experiences, traumatic experiences in recovery, challenges with some of the different treatment modalities, and ended up kind of going off the radar in terms of like recovery and that sort of thing for many years because I became a volunteer firefighter, and liked that, and that gave me like a sense of purpose and like a new identity beyond this idea of like, you're a drug user or an addict or however I was being framed at that time. And I was like, oh, well, how do I do this for a job? And so I found out I had to become an EMT. So I became an EMT and then went to work on an ambulance and eventually became a paramedic. And I retired as a lieutenant about, I think it's going to be 4 years next month, that I've been out of EMS. I did 8.5 years in EMS. If you're tracking the timeline here, I started as an EMT in Western Massachusetts right as fentanyl sort of came into the drug supply there. And as someone who was an overdose survivor and person in recovery, saw firsthand sort of the impact of substance use on the community that I was living in, which wasn't a place that I had grown up or had really any experience. And my parents had actually retired to Western Massachusetts, and I had to move back in with them when I was in early recovery. And I just sort of watched from the shadows a little bit as a first responder, sort of how communities were responding to substance use, how first responders felt about drug users, how the hospital and medical system was sort of reacting and responding, how they felt. and then how that was reflected in drug policy. And the thing that really shifted was that when I became a paramedic, I started to notice that we weren't actually responding to a whole lot of non-fatal overdoses anymore. We were mostly showing up to fatal overdoses, and the non-fatal ones were reversed by folks that were using drugs before we got there. So I saw this sort of like naloxone saturation in real time, which was that all of a sudden everybody who was using drugs had Narcan and were saving each other. They had become like the first responders to the overdose crisis, but that wasn't enough to help people who were using alone. And so that is what prompted me to get involved with this work, which is that I run an overdose detection hotline where we hang out with people who use drugs while they're using alone. And we spend anywhere from 7 minutes to 30 minutes on the phone with them while they're using. And in the rare event that they have an overdose, we're there to get them help. But most of what we do is offer people connection and a sense of value, and that their life value has value regardless of where they are, like within their stages of use or their stages of change. We're not a recovery hotline. We're not a treatment hotline. We don't suggest recovery or treatment to folks. We really are just there to hang out, listen, and be supportive of sort of where they're at and what they're doing. It's also important because a lot of the folks that use our service don't have a chaotic relationship with drugs. And so we don't enter with any sort of like assumption that someone who's calling is has a substance use disorder or needs treatment or anything of that sort. And that really allows us to have like a really positive and sort of low stress relationship with our callers. Yeah, that's sort of like how I got to here, at least.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing your story.
Yeah.
I'm
So-
from Western Mass myself.
Oh yeah, where are you from?
Springfield. Well, Holyoke I grew up in, and then
Okay,
over to Springfield.
nice. Yeah, so I lived in the Berkshires, so I worked in Pittsfield for a few years, and then I lived in North Adams for the last few that I was there.
Right. Get busy
But
during.
my wife's from Pittsfield, so
Right.
yeah. But yeah, I know the Springfield area well. I did my a lot of my paramedic. Well, I did paramedic school in Springfield, and I did my clinical rotations at Bay State.
Oh, okay.
I delivered babies there. I, worked on kids. I intubated people there. I saw traumas coming in from the streets. I mean, I have a really good sense of Springfield and the surrounding area.
I feel bad. I could just say that I went to Pittsfield and Lee for the outlets and see foliage. So my connection with the Berkshires.
That's about all we've got.
A far difference.
Yeah.
While you were explaining who you're speaking to or who you tailor your calls with, and you said most of the people aren't in chaotic use. So are these a lot of first time users or casual or?
It really is a mix. So I would say like we've got some regular callers who are existing sort of across that spectrum, like folks who are using all day long. Regular callers really only call like once a day, who are like using after work, like the way you might have a glass of wine after a long day. People inject fentanyl once a day at the end of a long day. So we are actually like really privy. Oh, hold on, I don't know if you guys could hear that, but I'm going to silence my email, so I'll have to hear it. Okay. So we're actually privy to seeing that entire spectrum of use of folks that I think a lot of people don't really get to see, because when you're criminalized, sharing even like slight things about your drug use can have serious consequences, right? So you can lose your family, your kids, your job, your housing. These are all things that are potentially compromised just by sharing that you use fentanyl once a day. So we often only see substance use when it is chaotic. And that skews our perception of what drug use looks like in America, because we're really seeing just chaotic substance use, because that's when people can't hide it anymore. Most of the time that I used drugs, I was not chaotic. Had a job. I had been elected to the city council. I was in school. And I was kind of holding it together, and no one knew that I was using. And it wasn't really until the end where, and the only person that really figured it out was my sister. And that's because she saw me using. But all the other stuff that was going on really just looked like, someone who was struggling with some mental health stuff. And they didn't really know how much of it was substance induced, my family, until my sister let them know. So anyway, we're sort of privy to that. We do have first time users. We've had people, we don't ask for any demographics like age or gender, but we do learn stuff about folks. We've had people as young as 15 who've just self-disclosed to the line, and we've had people in their 70s who've called. And so sometimes people are calling because they're returning to use after like a long period of abstinence. They're just like they're doing a one-time thing. We had someone call recently who was doing coke for like the first time in 5 years and had heard that there could be fentanyl in coke, and so just wanted to be safe. And he was like, "Yeah, I'll probably only do it tonight. Like, I'm not really interested in going back to that life that I had, but I just want to be safe tonight." And so, yeah, we see it all, which is pretty cool.
Were you at the Healthy Breakfast in Cranston or Warwick?
I don't think so.
There, okay, all right. I thought I saw. As I'm hearing you speak, I thinking that I saw you. Do you have stickers?
We have stickers, yeah.
Is
These
that what
ones?
you meant?
No.
No. Okay. Yeah.
So we were at there was like the governor's opioid thing.
Oh, okay. All right. That's where I got your sticker then. Okay.
Yeah,
All
our
right.
team was there, and our medical director gave the morning keynote. So
Oh,
Alex Wally, who's the BSAS medical director for
yep.
Massachusetts, he's also our medical director,
Yep.
and
Oh,
he gave the morning keynote that day.
all right. Yep. I was there. I knew as you started speaking, I was like, I've heard this. I know this. And I could just see the top of your t-shirt. And I was like, I think I have a sticker that looks like that.
I'm always on brand,
Yeah, yeah. So
Yeah,
I'm like drifting off here, way off our script.
that's okay.
Like, woo.
We don't need a script. It's morning.
That's right.
I'm drinking some matcha. You guys
Yeah.
don't have AC right now. It's like, we're just vibing.
Yeah,
That's right.
that's true. So overdoses have risen.
Yep.
Yep. And how do you think, from your vantage point, how have you seen trends evolve, and how is SafeSpot tailoring its support in this response?
Yeah. I would say overdoses have risen and fallen.
Yeah, yeah.
And are potentially rising again. I think that there's a lot of factors that play into like what drives overdose. The overdoses that we see, which a lot of times are mostly the fatal overdoses. A lot of overdoses that occur, as I said, are being responded to by other people that use drugs, friends and family, and those don't really get reported the same way. But when we look at fatal overdose numbers, um, I'm a big believer that the drug supply itself is probably the major driver of that. So the contents of the drug supply really sort of determine what's going to be the major trends up and down. And all of the public health interventions that we do help to sort of blunt as best they can some of those rises and pad some of those falls. But really, the drug supply itself is what I think, at least from what I do and what I study, is really the driving factor here. So the big example being when we looked at the massive increase in overdose, really starting in like 2014 through 2020, fentanyl was the driving force in pushing overdose deaths up. And that's because fentanyl is very potent and it's hard to measure. And so it leaves a lot of room for sort of dealer error and also user error in not realizing that you could have huge potency discrepancies between two different bags that came from the same dealer. So I like to explain it like in terms of, like, do you guys drink coffee? If you drink coffee, imagine that like you were going to drink 2 cups of coffee, and the first one you poured was a decaf, and the second one you had the equivalent of 200 cups of coffee in it. But you couldn't actually taste, smell, feel the difference until you had drank the whole thing. Now, after the first one, you would be like, oh, this coffee's crap, because it's decaf. After the second one, you'd actually have a heart attack and die.
Yeah.
And that really is what drug users are sort of experiencing when we have fentanyl in supply is that the variation between bags is significant.
Great.
So yeah. So really that does drive overdose. And the other problem too is that a lot of drug users are inexperienced, experimental, recreational, non-chaotic users who don't have any tolerance to the drug supply. Opioid tolerance is really important as a protective factor. Like the more you use, the more you need to use, but also you have like a sort of base to protect you from some of the fluctuation. But people who are using recreationally don't have that. And so, when you think about like a teenager who like takes a pill or who gets a pill and then sniffs it, if they have no tolerance, like that's incredibly dangerous for them, because they won't be able to withstand that potentially high potency. And then the other thing too is that we do see occasionally fentanyl contaminating other drugs like cocaine, meth, and crack. Some of the other pills like Xanax, Adderall, for example. So a lot of the fake pills are just pressed powder. So anything that can contaminate powder will also contaminate pills. And so a lot of times those are even more inexperienced or recreational users who have no tolerance. And so they're at incredibly high risk of an overdose. So there's a lot of factors when it comes to the drug supply. Now, that being said, right now we're seeing this sort of like decline down the other direction. So what has been the big change? Well, xylazine has been in the drug supply in the United States now for about 3 years, which corresponds with our sort of declining overdose deaths. And xylazine has a whole lot of other health impact besides overdose that can't be like discarded. We're seeing horrific wounds. People are losing limbs. They're ending up with horrible endocarditis and myocarditis, sepsis in the hospital, dying from infection, dying from those cardiac conditions. They don't get counted as overdose deaths. So we see because it's not an overdose, they're dying from complications of their substance use rather than from an acute intoxication. And so while we see overdose deaths dropping, we don't really quite have a great grasp of what the sort of counter effects have been in terms of like morbidity and mortality on the side of the other things that happen with the drug supply. So yes, overdose deaths are down, but I'm not really celebrating because I think that we'll be able to see sort of what the impact was on the other end. Xylazine is not really primarily an opioid. It's an alpha-2 adrenergic agonist. So it's sort of like the medication clonidine. And it is a really potent tranquilizer that's not supposed to be used in humans. It's approved only in animals. There's been no human testing ever of it. So all of our testing data is from animal studies. And the thing about xylazine is that it can give the appearance of a very severe overdose because people are really sedated. And so you can give them 10 doses of Narcan, and you hear this a lot. Oh, it took 10 doses to wake them up. That's not how Narcan works. Narcan is like the Hulk. It doesn't matter what opioid is in your system, whether it's heroin, oxy, fentanyl, Dilaudid. Narcan is incredibly potent and will kick any opioid off the receptor. So if you've already given 2 doses of Narcan, you've probably already kicked all the opioids off the receptors. So if that person is still unresponsive or they're not breathing well, there's a good chance that there's something else in the drug supply that's causing those symptoms. So we see a lot of benzos in the drug supply, which cause people to be unresponsive and not breathing well. And then tranq causes people to be unresponsive for a long time, like up to 4 to 8 hours. So you can give them as much Narcan as you want, but it's actually not going to wake them up. And so it's changed how overdose looks to people because they're used to like, oh, I gave them Narcan and they popped right up and woke up. That's really not what we see with xylazine. So overdoses may look more severe, but they actually aren't more severe because you're less likely to have a fatal overdose in that situation because the percentage of fentanyl is so much lower in the supply. So you asked like, what's my vantage point? I am am on the drug checking board for New England. So we look at all the drug supply samples. I teach about adulterants to public health professionals and especially to emergency medical services like around the country. So I'm really interested in adulterants and like what that means for the supply and what that means for drug users. When it comes to SafeSpot, it is a bit challenging because we base our overdose detection protocol off of verbal responsiveness because we're on the phone. So if someone can't see that person, it's hard to tell whether or not they're breathing if they're unresponsive. And so we've had a couple of false activations where we've, not false, but by our protocol, we've activated and that person was unresponsive, but they were breathing okay. They didn't need Narcan. EMS was able to like wake them up or something along those lines. And so it does shift sort of like how we're, thinking about supporting callers, how we're shifting our protocols a little bit. But it is complicated and it means that we have to be really on top of what's going on in the drug supply. Because we're a national service, like people can access us from anywhere in the country. I have to be really on top of trends all over the country because they do differ a lot. The West Coast has a very different supply than the East Coast. And so understanding those nuances is really important for like SafeSpot and how we support people.
So when people call in, do you ask what drug they're going to be using?
Yeah, so we ask what drug they think they're using.
Right, okay.
Yeah. That's also important because like the thing is if someone says to me like, oh, I'm injecting Coke, I'm
Mhm.
like, okay, well, I expect if you inject Coke, like in a couple of minutes, we're gonna have a really lively conversation about whatever's on your mind. Not that you're gonna be nodding out and like not able to hold a conversation with me. And so if they say I'm injecting Coke and all of a sudden a minute later they're like, oh, and they're slurring their speech, that's going to really raise my level of concern that there's not just coke in that and that we're going to see something. Whereas if someone says I'm injecting fentanyl, I'm expecting them to be slurry and having a hard time following the conversation, etc. So I'm going to have less alarm from that, where I'm going to be like, okay, this is what we're sort of looking for here. This is what we're expecting.
Mhm.
We're going to ride it out the same way. But it is helpful for us to know at least what people think they're using.
And you also know where they are in the country, so you can follow the trends of what's in that Coke or what's in that fentanyl or what's.
Yeah, it can be a little bit disjointed, but at least we know like general trends.
Yeah.
So on a typical call, the information you ask is pretty much just location and the substance they're using.
Yeah, so because we're anonymous, and we don't store any demographic data, we ask for a first name. A real first, I mean, they don't have to give us a real first name. A real first name is helpful. If, Greg, if you tell me your name is Bob and you're nodding out and I'm yelling Bob into the phone with my dad voice, like that's not going to have the same impact if I'm like, like trying to wake you up.
Yeah.
Right.
So it is helpful to have a real first name just for that purpose. We ask for like an exact location, and that doesn't have to be a house. We spot people out in public a lot. We spot people in their cars, under a bridge, wherever they are. We can find them. Our operators, the biggest part of our operator training really comes around location and like being able to accurately figure out where someone is. And if you can't reach out and give that person Narcan yourself, mentally, you don't know where they are. And so that really is like where a lot of our training and role play and drills, that's what we're trying to do. After that sort of information is gathered, we do a lot of location prepping. So that means like we don't want your door locked if it's possible. We don't need EMS having to break down your door. It can delay access to you and you can get you in trouble with your landlord or cost a lot if you own your house or whatever. So let's make sure that door is unlocked if it's safe to do so. We ask people to put away any drugs they're not using. That way they don't get taken or get them in trouble. So if you're not, whatever you're using and how you're using it should be the only thing that's out in case there's an overdose. Everything else should be out of sight. Make sure weapons are away if there's any like weapons around. We ask that people lock up their pets in a separate room if that's possible. We don't want cats escaping through an open door or a dog to get shot by a cop because it's like trying to defend your body. And we make sure your phone is charged, and so the phone doesn't die while we're on the phone. And so we're just basically doing like space prep with people to get them ready for first responders in case that happens. But That actually only happens about 0.4% of the time.
Mm.
So 99.6% of our calls don't end in an overdose. So we do a lot of prep work just in case. Our goal is to not have to activate. We do a lot of work with people to slow down their use. So a lot of times we notice people overdose the second time they use on a call because there's like an additive effect. So we'll try to like space them out a little bit. Like, all right, let's like wait. You're really slurry right now. Can we wait like an extra 3 minutes before you do your next line? Because I don't want to have to call on you. So does your dealer warn you when your stuff is really strong or weak? These are all things that can help us to prevent. We don't want to have to activate EMS. That's the worst case scenario. We want to prevent overdoses from actually happening in the first place. And so part of that is just trying to like slow people down, make them think about ways to be safer, those sorts of things.
I just got so many questions.
I-
So some states are emphasizing naloxone distribution and peer navigator outreach. How does SafeSpot align with equipping callers with immediate harm reduction tools?
Yeah. So I think that we're able to connect people with local resources usually if they're looking for those sorts of things. What we find is that our callers are actually generally well resourced, so they heard about us because they access something local that told them about us. That's a major pathway to finding out about SafeSpot. So it's not a huge part of what we do. um, I will say that like one of the reasons why I started SafeSpot is that as a paramedic showing up at fatal overdoses in a time where there was naloxone saturation, you can have Narcan right next to you, but if you're alone, no one's there to push the plunger, right? And I have always operated from a place that fatal overdose, so overdose is not preventable. Overdoses can be, the risk of overdose can be lowered, but theoretically speaking, overdose can happen even if you're incredibly careful because of the drug supply potency. Fatal overdose, on the other hand, is totally preventable because if as long as somebody's there with you to uh, notice that you're having an overdose and do something about it, there's no reason to die from an overdose. So I always look at every fatal overdose was something that could have been prevented. And so I think that we really try to fill that gap, which is that, yes, we want everybody who uses drugs and anyone who loves someone who uses drugs or anyone who thinks that they could be in a situation where they could find someone experiencing an overdose, which pretty much is everybody. We want you to carry Narcan. It's important. However, we also need to have a system that's there for people who don't have someone there to recognize that they're having an overdose. And that's really where we fit in more. And we always tell people too, like, you may use with your girlfriend, you say you use 10 times a day. And so that's like 70 times a week. You may use with her 68 of those 70 times a week. But what if she goes to the store? What if she goes to see her mom for a couple hours? What if she's at work? What if she's going to pick up? Who's watching you those 2 times? Because what I found as a paramedic is it was always those like one-off times that got people. I would go and it'd be like a roommate and be like, hey, like we don't really use together. And I like went to work for a couple hours and I came back and found them dead. And so helping people to think about those 2 times that they don't use with somebody, I think is really the strategy. To think about, okay, over the course of a week, 68 out of 70 times you're using with somebody else. Let's talk about those 2 times that you're not with somebody else, what that looks like, where you are. You may be alone because you're driving you have an appointment with a doctor and you're going to use before you go in and you're in the parking lot outside. No one's going to notice you in the parking lot outside. So we can spot you in your car. It'll take 7 minutes. And then we make sure you're okay. And then we get off the phone and you go into your appointment. So that's really like what we're trying to slot into people's lives.
Now, is SafeSpot 24/7?
Yep.
And starting this, did you Did you have to address many barriers? Was there stigma surrounding it?
Oh boy, yeah, I could do a whole 2-hour podcast. I actually do I have a workforce talk where I talk a lot about some of the barriers. I would say that yes, we're 24/7, nights, holidays, weekends, Thanksgiving, Christmas. I helped on an overdose on Father's Day. I've got 5 kids. I was dealing with an overdose on Father's Day. Um, so we're available all the time. Actually, our night shift is the busiest, and our night shift is led by TJ Thompson, who's amazing. Our day shift is led by Kimber King. Kimber survived an overdose on the hotline, is now our operations coordinator. So like our entire team has our entire leadership team has lived experience with overdose. 70% of our operators have lived experience. So that's lived or living experience. We don't have an abstinence requirement for people who work on the hotline. It's important to me because if I return to use today, I'm going to be really high risk. I should feel safe using my own resource.
Right.
And so we never would want one of our operators to die alone from an overdose. And so we have no abstinence requirement. People are free to, because it's confidential and anonymous, our operators are free to use the service as they need to, and they do. At one point, 20% of our calls were coming from our own team. So that is really important to me. We have a lot of callers who are harm reduction workers who work in treatment centers who are just like heavily stigmatized and worried about, being found out, but they want to be careful. And so we're actually supporting the sort of wider addiction workforce in a lot of ways. And so that is really important to me as like a workforce person. In terms of barriers, I mean, we started this with no money. It was all volunteer, including myself. And we did that for like really our first 2.5 years. And we got our first round of funding from the Rise Foundation here in Massachusetts in October of 2022. And now we're funded in 3 states. And we have a fully paid team. We've got 3 full-timers, 2 that are being converted to full-time, and then we've got about 40 per diem operators who take calls. By the end of this year, we should be close to 80 operators as we continue to grow, and we're working with other states on securing funding as well. But yeah, we've faced all sorts of barriers, political, institutional. We deal with a lot of skepticism from drug users that this is not like a cop line, and we're not like going to go arrest them, or that we're going to activate on them every time they call. It's great statistically now. We've spotted something like 25,000 use events, and we've only activated EMS 26 times. So if being able to tell people that is really helpful to let them know, like, yeah, we spot people all day long, and an overdose is like a sentient event for us. Like, it's something that happens and is very significant because it happens so infrequently. So yeah.
So my next question to you was, how does having people with life experience running you being the recipients on your hotline help to reach marginalized communities? But as I'm hearing you speak, I would think one of the advantages of having some lived experience is knowing when to call for help, because I think myself, I would be a giant worry wart. I would be like, hello, okay, I'm calling, right? I mean,
yeah, no, I agree. I think for a lot of our folks that are active users, they know how they want to be spotted too.
yeah,
So they try to offer the same to others, which is interesting because a lot of times I'll get a question like, well, aren't you worried that someone's going to spot someone when they're like messed up and they're not? And those are the people who are the most paranoid about providing the service at a high quality because they're the ones who rely on it to keep themselves alive.
yeah.
So they would never do something that they would not want done to them, right? We've actually never had that issue before. I will say that there are varying comfort levels in, what sort of an operator is willing to hang in for, right? So we had a caller that was we were activating on a lot because there was xylazine in the supply and it was really sedating and we couldn't keep verbal. So And then, fire department would show up and be able to wake them up in like, 1 second. So I said, like, hey, here's what I want to do. I need you to stay really close to the phone with it on speakerphone so that I can try to hear your breathing. And sure enough, person used, went unresponsive about 4 or 5 minutes later, but I could hear the breathing and it was nice, deep breaths at a really good rate. I could not wake them up no matter how hard I tried. And I sat there and listened to them breathe for 30 minutes without calling. Even though they were verbally unresponsive, I could hear, I was counting breaths and making sure that the rate was within a safe zone and we were getting nice deep breaths and I could hear those breaths. And I'm a paramedic, so I felt comfortable counting a respiratory, calculating a respiratory rate, sort of like judging what I was hearing as sufficient breath, and hung in there with that person for 30 minutes and then didn't activate on them. And sure enough, 30 minutes later, woke up and was like, what happened? I was like, well, you just gave me a very stressful 30 minutes, but we didn't have to activate. So that was good, but not everybody's going to be that comfortable.
What do you do for your self-care? Because I feel like if I was on that call for 30 minutes listening to every breath, I would be a mess after. I would be like crying, and I'm so happy that they were okay. But I think that 30 minutes would take a toll on me.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a paramedic, right? So I've been through
Yeah.
some bad stuff. I in my career I responded to like more than 8,000 calls. I've done over 300 field pronouncements. Like it's just that's just part of that job. So I'm a bit unique in that sense. Our team, we focus a lot on self-care. Part of our model for is that people don't have set schedules, so they take calls when they feel up to it. And so if they need to leave and go to an inpatient substance use or psych treatment place for a month, like they're welcome to go do that. We're not their primary income source. So we've built a lot of flexibility into like how we manage our workforce. And like we have 24 hours. So if someone has an overdose at 4 or 5 in the morning, I will get woken up to debrief them. So my ringer's on 24 hours a day. I personally debrief all operators after overdoses. And so that's built in. We have supervisors on 24 hours a day as well. So nobody ever has to do an overdose on their own. So the second an overdose is determined, they start the process of getting EMS on the way, and then they'll tag in a supervisor to that call so that they're not sitting there alone. Because sitting there alone waiting for EMS to show up is terrible. It feels horrible. It feels like an eternity, and you know that your caller, and like we have relationships with our callers, like we care about them a lot. So to sit there for 6, 7 minutes waiting for EMS to show up can be pretty grueling. And so there's always someone to tag in to be there for that. Sometimes it's me, depending on what it is. So we're that. In terms of my own self-care, I'm a beach guy. I moved to Plymouth here in Mass so I could be closer to the beach. So I spend a lot of time in the ocean. And yeah,
You get all those kids to keep you busy.
I have a lot of kids to keep me busy. Yep. So full house. And yeah, I if I really need to work something out in my head, I go mow my lawn. It takes like 10,000 steps to mow my lawn, so I can work a lot out in that time. But yeah, I mean, it's just like, yeah, the thing I will say is that what is a common thread amongst our operators is that everyone's coming to this from a place of grief. um, all of us on our team have lost somebody that we care about, and most of us have lost a lot of people, like dozens. So pretty much everybody I went to rehab with died in the first 5 years. Most of my leadership team, all of their friends died, and our operators, there's no exception there either. So everybody has that. That's the one thing actually that probably links everybody together, regardless of what drug they used, if they used, how long they've been abstinent, if they're abstinent. The thing that links everybody is that we're all grieving. And so that is sort of central to the work as well.
I was going to ask about relationships. I just have again.
And I have questions too, Greg. Be
I want
quiet.
to be respectful. I want to be respectful of Stephen's
I
time.
know, I know.
But I was going to ask about the relationships, but you answered that. But you also said something that stuck with me. You said you're in 3 states now and you're working to get in other states, but until you get in those other states, can you accept calls from anywhere, or do
Yeah.
they have to be in those 3 states that you're currently?
No, part of the deal is we've been really lucky that Massachusetts has been so supportive of us growing the line and trying to figure this out. We are a first of its kind in terms of like being a professionalized thing. We're within the hospital system. Our team's paid, right? It's very abnormal. There's no other line like this in the U.S. And while we work towards getting federal funding, states have been partnering with us because we're also a workforce project. So, like for example, we're starting up with Connecticut. That's our sort of next big state, and we'll be hiring 20 people with lived or living experience per year of the contract as per diem operators. So and like building capacity for that workforce, and supporting people who use drugs and like having jobs. So um, the nice thing about when a state funds us is that they can also feel good about spreading the word more, in a more strategic and way, right? So like we're fine with people calling from all over. We're fine with you sharing this with your folks and people that you know, and through your organizations. We just won't give you we won't send any printed materials out of our states. Um, so you were lucky you got a sticker. That's because we were there in person. Um, we won't send any printed materials out of state, and we won't actively advertise in other states usually. But when states come online as being part of our system, then they get access to me and my team who do a lot of presenting. Like my operations person, Kimber, presents multiple times a day to community groups, usually on Zoom. I've got an outreach person, buyer who's in Massachusetts, driving around, physically going to programs, making sure our posters are up, talking to people, talking to providers, talking to drug users. And that's his day all day long. He goes program to program, region by region. And so that's a benefit of like having us funded in your state, is that we actually go do that. So hopefully, Rhode Island is a target state for us. We are trying to cover New England first. So right now we have Maine, Connecticut, and Massachusetts. We're going to be working hopefully in Vermont soon and in Rhode Island soon. Um, yeah, I hope to expand more formally into Rhode Island so I can get us more involved in what's going on there. I live really close, so I like the proximity. I like to be able to travel in person to check things out. So
Let us know if we can be any help. We have
yeah,
some
thank you.
friends that are always willing to jump in. Can I ask you a kind of a side question, because you have kids? What would you tell parents about how to talk to their kids about drugs? Do you mind?
Oh, that's a great question.
Yeah.
It's a hard one.
Yeah.
So one of my kids is our godson, who's 21, and he lost his dad and his brother to overdose. And we had him from when he was 12. And um, when he went to college, I equipped him with both fentanyl test strips and naloxone. And I said, listen, you may use, you may not, but you're going to know people who do, regardless of whether you choose to or not. For him, having that family impact, he's been much more cautious around, sort of like, cocaine or, opiates, etc. Um, but you're going to know people who use. And so it's important for you to know, not just for yourself, but for your friends, one, how to respond to an overdose, and two, like how to keep each other safe, because experimentation is normal. And everybody I went to college with, almost all of my friends used the same drugs that I did. Um, Only a couple of us developed a substance use disorder. So like out of my like sort of wider friend group of like 20 people, only two of us ever developed like what could be like diagnosed as substance use disorder. Most of them all tried opiates, all tried benzos, all tried stimulants of some sort, hallucinogens, etc. It's kind of a normal part for a lot of people of, depending on what school you go to and where you are, it's part of that culture. And um, just like people try alcohol and decide whether or not that's something that they want to engage in or not, A lot of people do that with drugs. Our drug supply is more dangerous than it's ever been. And so we really need to talk to kids about safer use the same way we've shifted away from like abstinence style education around sex. Um, we know that abstinence only sex education increases teen pregnancy and STDs in those communities because teaching them just to not to do something that they're probably going to do because you can't talk about it with one another doesn't make them safer. And so the same thing happens with drugs. The Just Say No campaigns, telling people not to use, and not giving them the tools on how to do it safer if they choose to, um, makes them less safe and makes them higher risk. And back in my day, you could get away with taking a pill, a pharmaceutical pill, and probably being okay. You could have a Percocet, or you could, take someone's Adderall from, that you met at the library or whatever, and you would be okay. Because of fentanyl, that's become a lot more dangerous. And so we need to make sure that we're educating young people about those risks. And if you don't feel comfortable, use my tactic, right? If you don't feel comfortable directly addressing their drug use yourself, make it about their friends and like that they're going to be around people that are going to do that stuff. And no matter what, they should know how to respond to an overdose. They should be CPR trained. And they should know like what's in the like what the deal is with the drug supply, and it can't be fear-based because fear-based also doesn't work. So I will say that like having kids, so I have kids from 21 down to 4, the older kids, the teenagers, it's a little bit of a different world than it was for us at that age. I think they're really absorbed in their phones, and like the amount of substance, like we're actually seeing substance. Like if you look at, I mean, you guys work in the prevention side. If you look at teen drug use, it's actually been trending down over time. Teen substance use in general is down. They're delaying their interest in sex and relationships. There's a lot sort of changing in that demographic. What's not changing is the rate of overdose. And actually, the rate of overdose is going up in that demographic, even though substance use is going down in that demographic. And so that tells me everything I need to know about like the risk issue. And so, yeah, try to have open communication as best as possible with your kids. And I get it. It's hard. It's hard to talk to your kids about this stuff. I'm an expert and I talk about this stuff all day long and I still struggle with it. So I totally understand how challenging it is. But I also have a lot of friends who've buried their kids. And I don't want to, if I ever, God forbid, I'm ever in that situation, I want to know that I at least equip my kids with the most knowledge they could possibly have on how to keep themselves safe, and how to keep their friends safe. So,
All right, so even though we're in Rhode Island,
yeah,
can you still share your phone number for people to call?
yeah, of course.
Well, like
Yeah,
SafeSpot number,
Facebook.
yeah, not just the
yeah,
contact information, but the number.
yeah. No, it's 1-800-972-0590, 24 hours a day, available anywhere. We do have people from Rhode Island to call. So we're used to it. We have at least 2 operators who are from Rhode Island as well. So you may call and get somebody from Rhode Island.
You don't have to tell them
Um,
from Massachusetts.
yeah. You might even know our operators. They're involved in the community that you guys work in. So
Oh,
both of them. So yeah. So but yeah, we're available. I think if like you're a parent and you're watching this with your kid that's home from rehab, like the one piece of advice I'll give is that return to use is a expected and typical part of someone's journey through, if you want to call it recovery or whatever you want to call it. People are going to return to use. I did several times. And I think that the problem is that we put a lot of positive emphasis and praise on people building up time and counting days, which makes them feel really, really ashamed and scared and embarrassed if they return to use because they have to restart counting, and and then you're disappointed and et cetera. So if you have like an adult kid that's like going through this, try to de-emphasize that day counting stuff a little bit. It liberated me when my family forgot my anniversary. I have a sort of anniversary coming up in a couple weeks. And a couple years ago, my family forgot about it. My parents forgot, my sister forgot, and it was the most liberating thing for me because it allowed me to finally speak about like what I had been through, and that it wasn't actually a true sobriety abstinence date because I really held on to it for them and not for me because they needed it, I didn't. And I wish that I could have let go of it earlier because I would have been able to have more open communication about what really was going on with me, with the people that cared about me, and that they could be supportive when I was returning to use. The more supportive you are with someone when they're in that stage, the shorter it's probably going to be, because shame is what like really keeps people kind of in these cycles. And so if you meet return to use with love and with support and like, hey, I know you're using again. I have a boundary. The boundary is that you don't do it alone. Either you're gonna let me know when you do it so I can check on you every 5 minutes, or if I'm not home and you're gonna do it, you've got to call SafeSpot and stay on the phone with them. So I don't have to come home and find you dead. You know, if you always frame that in terms of your own life, you know, like that, I think that is much more powerful than making it about them and their failure and whatever. You know, this is about you. Like you don't deserve to find your child dead. That's a horrible, horrible thing to experience, and it's a horrible thing to do to somebody on your way out, you know. But we also create that condition by making it so shameful to use drugs and to return to use that people are hiding it because they're trying to protect you from having to see what they're going through. But what that really does is it creates an unsafe environment, and it creates an environment where then parents are forced to then find their dead kids when they could have protected them. So I think that that's a way of sort of shaping that conversation to be much more productive. And a return to use should not automatically mean someone has to go back to rehab. I was told that if I returned to use, I had to go back to rehab. Rehab was traumatizing for me. I didn't enjoy it. I felt like I was like institutionalized for 28 days. And so being forced to go back was something that made it so I didn't feel safe telling them that I was using again. And I only used for 2 days, right? And then I was like, oh, I don't want to do this actually because it's making me nauseous. And I just spent the last 2 years not feeling nauseous ever. And I don't like how that makes me feel. Um, but I wish I could have done that in a way where the people around me could have supported me better. So it's a lot to think about, a lot to unpack. And I know that it's tough and it's hard being a parent. But call SafeSpot with your kid for the first time. Pick up the phone. We do it all the time. They're called informational calls. We love them. Call SafeSpot with your kid. Ask us to explain how it works. Ask us to talk to them. Like we're a bunch of drug users. It's got to be fine. It's going to be chill. We're going to talk about your cat or whatever you want to talk about. We all have cat. A lot of us have cats. I have 3 cats. I was a dog person my whole life, and my wife converted me to cats, and now I'm like super cat, which is perfect because everybody on the hotline seems to have a cat. So, yeah, we're going to talk about random stuff, but do it together. Do it with your loved one so they feel comfortable, because you're also like giving them permission to use the service and not to feel guilty about it. And we also can just try calling your parent first if you overdose, or your roommate or your spouse, and they can respond to the overdose if they feel comfortable and if they're ready and if they answer the phone. We'd like to have the backup to be able to call 911, but we can also keep it in the house if that's something you want to set up. If mom's going to bed and she's worried that her kid is going to be using alone at 11 o'clock at night, she shouldn't have to worry when she goes to bed that she's going to wake up 7 o'clock the next morning and find her kid dead. We can be on the phone with them while mom's upstairs sleeping. And if mom keeps her ringer on and answers the phone, she can go down and respond to the overdose. We know that parents are responding to overdoses, but we can actually alert you to the fact that you need to do it. And if you happen to sleep through it, we'll call 911 and you'll wake up to the ambulance at your house and not to a dead kid. So that's really to me, that's the sell. And so I really hope that people take that to heart. And work with the folks in their life that are, because the thing is, reality is not a lot of drug users are going to listen to this or hear this, but people who love drug users will.
Mhm.
And that's what we want. We want people to reach out and help bring their kids to resources that are non-judgmental and safe. And I guarantee you, after months of using our service, they will feel better about themselves to the point where they're going to want to make changes, all sorts of changes in their life, because we're going to help to create an environment where they feel like they matter regardless of what's going on with their drug use. So that's my pitch to parents here and to people that support loved ones. So yeah.
This has been wow.
Yep.
I mean, I could go another 2 hours.
Yeah, I could talk to you all day.
but that is one heck of a way to end the podcast. What a
Mhm.
nugget to leave with people.
Mhm.
I just feel like SafeSpot has dotted every I and crossed every T with everything
Mhm.
that would prevent someone from falling. It's like you've got the answer. This is great.
I've had one of our legislators' ears about something else recently, and now I'm like, oh, she's gonna think I'm nuts. I'm gonna have to call her about SafeSpot.
So
We'll
Steve,
take it.
I just, oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, we'll take you out. Get their ear and let them know, and I'm happy to meet with them too. I think we've done everything we can on our side to make this as safe and welcoming a place as we can imagine, but we haven't figured out how to get people to call yet.
Mm.
Yes, we have callers. Yes, we've spotted 20, but it is a drop in the bucket. I think we had 157 unique callers last year. That's it. Meanwhile, 100,000 people died from overdose. We are not reaching people as well as I want us to be. And so what we need help with is figuring out how to get, how people can get their loved ones feel comfortable calling so that they don't have to experience what so many families have gone through in this country. But part of that is building trust.
Mhm.
And so help us help you build trust with your loved one, and yeah, it's free. It's 24 hours a day. Like this is what we're here for. So I think we've had multiple calls since we've been on I have it up on a third monitor. I can see what's going on the hotline. Multiple people have called while we've been here, so like that's just how it's going. So yeah, please reach out.
One more time before we let you go. Can you get that number out?
Yep. 1-800-972-0590.
It's been great talking to you, Steve.
Thank you for all you do. Great
For the
service.
visual learners.
Awesome. Love it.
The sticker we can't have yet.
I gotta find one and make photocopies.
Steve, you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. It's great talking to you.
Okay.
Thank you so
All right.
much. Reach out anytime. Bye.